Good morning to those of you that are joining us. We've got everybody sitting in a waiting room and just entering into the virtual webinar this morning. For those of you that are just waiting for things to get started, I'm Kelly Chambers with Alberta-British Columbia Seed Growers, and I will just let you know that we have in excess of 149 participants that have registered for the event, and we're very pleased to see this kind of interest in a late season webinar. And our entries seem to have somewhat stabilized. So I'm going to invite Lori Hayes of Saskatchewan Seed Growers Association to start the agenda for the day.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our SeedTalk Prairies webinar for 2023. Today, we're going to tackle the topic about seed vigor testing, and we're very appreciative of the speakers that we have lined up to give some information, and also really appreciate all the people who have registered to participate. So we'll just start with a little bit of housekeeping first. The meeting is going to be recorded, number one. Everybody will be on mute during the presentations and the Q&A. If there's an echo, you have both your phone and computer on, so press pound and your participant ID number, pound on your phone, and the computer will be disconnected. If you have technical difficulties, text Jeff at 403-975-9981 or email him at jeff@colesag.com, and we will put that information into the Q&A so that you can see it. And again, the seminar is being recorded. There's two ways to ask a question. First, you can type it into the Q&A at any time, and then when we get to doing the questions component, then we will call you up to speak, or you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question directly. So you push the raise hand button at the bottom of the page, and we will unmute you. Remember to unmute yourself. I either press the microphone icon or *6, and then mute yourself again once you're done with your question. So that's the raise hand down. You can see on the two bar ones. Then once you've got it up, we'll mute you and then lower it when you're done. On the mobile device, the bottom. So the agenda for today, we've already been through the welcome and the housekeeping. First, we're going to have presentations from Dr. Steve Jones. We'll lead a round of questions, and that's a time where you can pose your questions to our presenters today, and we hope to adjourn by noon. So we'll start this morning a presentation from Steve Jones and Alison Powell. Steve Jones worked in the UK for 30 years in three main areas: horticulture, forestry, and agriculture. His PhD studies were on physiology and dormancy in forest trees, specifically Sitka spruce. He left the UK in 2008 to become the head of the official seed testing for England and Wales, based at the National Institute of Botany in Cambridge. His agricultural work included seed sampling, certification, crop inspecting, and seed testing. He moved to Canada in 2008 to work with CFIA, and in 2022 retired as the head of the seed certification testing unit in the Seed Science and Technology section of CFIA's Saskatoon laboratory. Both the National Institute of Botany and CFI laboratories were, and still are, International Seed Testing Association, and that's called ISTA for short, and you'll hear that a few times today, accredited seed sampling and testing laboratories. For ISTA, he worked as the ISTA Rules Chair from 2000 to 2018 and was at different times a member of both the ISTA Purity and Vulcan Sampling Committees. He was also elected as an ex officio member of the ISTA Executive Committee from 2004 and ISTA President from 2019 to 2022 and is currently the ISTA Immediate Past President until 2025. He's also the Executive Committee Regional Director for North America. His other ISTA interests include analyst training, sampling, and Q&A, quality assurance, being an ISTA technical advisor for ISTA's lab accreditation scheme. Alison's introduction. She's worked in Scotland and the UK for 45 years, working on the physiological basis of seed aging and the application of this to the development of Vigour tests to predict the relative field emergence and storage potential of crop seeds. Her training began at the University of Stirling and later at the University of Aberdeen. She was awarded a higher doctorate, which is a Doctor of Science, in 2004 in recognition of her contribution to the seed science and technology. Her research includes work in collaboration with colleagues from more than 20 countries and is focused on a wide range of crops: maize, soybeans, peas, and many vegetable species. As a result of this research, the electrical conductivity, control deterioration, and radical emergent Vigour tests were developed and introduced as validated tests into the ISTA rules of seed testing. She has been involved with the ISTA Association since and has been chair of the Vigour Committee since 2001. She is currently also chair of the Seed Science Advisory Group and deputy editor of Seed Science and Technology. Welcome to both Steve and Alison, and the virtual floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Laurie, for the introduction and bios. So I'll just share my screen. So is that showing okay for you, Laurie?
Yes, thank you.
So as the introduction, I'm going to give the presentation on behalf of Alison and myself today, but Alison's going to be available for questions after this and provide more of the technical background. My role here today is to give you an overview of the International Seed Testing Association, ISTA, and in particular the Vigour test methods that already exist in the ISTA rules. So I'm going to start with what ISTA is and what it does, and then talk about how ISTA achieves standardization in its seed test methods. There are the international rules for seed testing, ISTA rules, and in those there are standardized methods for germination, purity, other seed determinations, moisture, and also Vigour. So it's Vigour that we're going to focus on today. And we're also going to talk about in general why Vigour testing is important and what makes a good Vigour test method. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from Saskatoon, Treaty 6 land and home of the Métis. And as well as ISTA meetings that I'll mention at the end of the talk, there's an American AOSA Association meeting in Saskatoon in June this year that you may want to go to. So a quick reminder on what ISTA is. It's a global non-profit association of seed testing laboratories and individual seed professionals. ISTA operates under the governments of the member nations or countries with distinct economies. So the governments have voting rights within ISTA as ISTA members, and therefore the methods that are approved annually at the ISTA meetings are internationally approved. The first meeting of ISTA was in 1924 in Cambridge in the UK at the National Institute of Agricultural Botany, where I worked just before coming to Canada. ISTA has a global membership. Over 83 countries, distinct economies there have potentially have voting rights. And there are over 240 laboratories around the world, 150 of those are accredited, and accredited means that they can issue Orange International or Blue International certificates. They partake within proficiency testing, and they're also audited on a regular basis by ISTA technical and systems auditors. What ISTA does within the methodologies and the things that ISTA wants to look at are 4 main pillars and areas. There's the international rules for seed testing, and they give these standardized methodologies. There aren't standards like you think of for Canada #1, like 85 or 95% germinations or freedom from different weeds, but there are the standard methods to how to do a germination test, how to do a vigor test, how to do moisture tests, and how to look for the purities. And those results are issued in a standardized way onto the Orange International or Blue International certificates. The international standardization is achieved by having accredited labs, and those accredited labs are audited on a regular basis, and there are internal and external proficiency tests required. So therefore you get that standardized reporting and uniformity in seed testing that ISTA aims for. Underpinning the methods of validation studies before something can be added to the ISTA rules. And there's also dissemination of scientific knowledge with the journals of ISTA and technical meetings and workshops that ISTA organizes around the world. The Orange or the Blue International certificates I've mentioned are usually issued for export, and there's about 200,000 of those issued every year. And in 2023, there is the aim to move to an electronic system to supplement the paper issuing of the certificates. The 20 technical committees or groups within ISTA help ISTA with its seed experts around the world to work on the different methods. And the Vigour committee that Alison has chaired since 2001 is one of those. And we're going to talk about that Vigour work now. Vigour seed testing methods have been in the ISTA rule since 2002. And as we've already mentioned, they're standardized and internationally agreed on. And by ensuring we have the accredited labs and proficiency testing and laboratory auditing, the results of a Vigour test in one lab in a different country should be similar to those issued by the other countries. The validated ISTA test methods in the rules at the moment are based on either aging the seed or the whole process of aging, or based on physiological changes in the seed during aging. Because high vigor and low vigor that we talk about are linked to the aging process within seeds. So accelerating aging in the ISTA methods with its details of the precise temperatures and durations and moisture content that needs to be done, it is there for soybean. Controlled deterioration for brassica species. For electrical conductivity, that has been validated for peas, beans, chickpeas, and radish. There's a tetrazolium staining Vigour method for soybean, and then more recently, radical emergence. Radical emergence is based on the more traditional germination test, but the technical details of that is more precise, and the germination period and temperatures more distinct, and the ISTA rules give all those details. And at the moment, they are available for oilseed rape, Argentine canola, maize, radish, and wheat, and there's work being done on others. In the impact of low vigor in the field, it can be poor emergence, less uniform emergence, and for transplant production, again, less cells filled, double cells maybe, or empty cells, and also for the low vigor, storage potential is reduced. So some of you may have seen fields with poor emergence, but things like these pictures here are how the seed vigor methods are validated by using field trials and comparisons to be able to predict what would happen under field conditions. Germination percentage gives you the idea of what will happen under ideal field conditions. Vigour tests helps you make informed decisions on when the field conditions are less favourable. An example is the electrical conductivity or EC test for grain legumes that Alison was key in developing in the UK. And here you might have a high level of germination for several seed lots, but in time that can deteriorate as the seed ages. So the membrane on the peas leaks more, and you can test that by the water solution or the conductivity of that solution under test methods in the lab. But then the key is to be able to predict that in the field. And what was developed in the UK for use as guidance for UK growers, that was that different levels of conductivity measured in the test gave you an indication of seed lots that either had high vigor, low vigor, or in some instances do not use at all. So this allowed the people producing the seed, for when they were advising to sow those in cold, wet conditions in the UK, to maybe sow the high vigor seeds first and wait and sow the lower vigor seeds when the field conditions were getting a bit better. If we look at the germination progress curves, or the idea of germination, you have time along the bottom axis here, and then the percent germination as recorded along the side axes. And you can see these 3 seed lots of maize. The 2 seed lots there with high vigor also have very high germination. And the one with lower vigor doesn't have that much lower germination. In fact, in some instances, all 3 seed lots might have the same germination, but take a longer time to germinate. So there's a longer lag period. And here also it's important to note that we're not considering dormancy. We're assuming that there is no dormancy, because dormancy can conflict with the vigor estimations. And that's something that we can talk about later. As I mentioned, radical emergence is the most recent vigor test method added to the rules. And these are the 4 crop species it's already established for. So laboratories with the ISTA rules would be able to follow these test methods and be able to produce uniform test methods. But it's important to note that a lab needs to practice and perform those, get used to performing the test methods and be involved in PTs to make sure their results are similar to others. Many of the large companies will have their own vigor methods that they maybe don't publish, or they keep themselves, to be able to rank their own seed lots and know when to use them, when to sow them, and at what stage also how long to store them. Some of those test methods may involve suboptimal germination temperatures, but at the moment, things like that aren't standardized for all to use in the ISTA rules. So in conclusion, in giving you this very brief overview of what ISTA does and how it helps standardize and increase uniformity in testing, we've delved into the vigor test methods, and Alison's going to be available to give more detailed answers to some questions that you might have. Is it easy to standardize and come up with a laboratory test? A laboratory test, yes, but then you have to be careful and make sure that all the labs can apply it in the same way. And that laboratory test can help you rank seed lots in terms of vigor. But to be predictive of field performance under a range of different conditions, you also need to validate that lab test under those field conditions. And those field conditions will vary from different countries or regions. So the example that we gave of the electrical conductivity for the UK may vary for Canada or other conditions. Method validation is an important link to be able to create that field performance and prediction, and can take 5 years or more, because you want to be able to repeat those field tests over a number of seasons. So although you can maybe develop a lab test based on physiological needs, membrane thickness or rate of germination, to make it predictive of vigor in the field takes longer. So I hope that has given you a brief overview of Vigour and set the scene for our discussions today. Just a reminder that if you wanted to know more about ISTA, there is an annual meeting for ISTA in Verona this year in June. And there's the 100 years of ISTA in Cambridge in the UK in 2024, or a larger meeting with scientific papers in 2025 in Christchurch, New Zealand. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Steve. And we now are going to have a quick word from one of our sponsors, SeedCan, and we thank you so much to SeedCan for your continued sponsorship and support of our SeedTalk Prairies series. So we'll have a short video and then a short address from Todd Hyra. Thank you.
Earth will be home to nearly 10 billion people by 2050. Canadian agricultural exports will be more critical than ever before, especially high-demand crops like wheat, barley, oats, flax, soybeans, and pulses. And it all starts with the seed. But how do Canadian farmers stay competitive with the best varieties for their farm? The answer is having many, many local seed companies who select, grow, and process the best seed for each region. There are over 600 of these that together form SeedCan. So SeedCan is not a seed company, but an association of independent businesses. By collecting a small royalty across millions of acres, SeedCan has returned over $100 million to plant breeders. Together, SeedCan members fund development of new varieties in partnership with universities and public breeding programs, ensuring that farmers have the best genetics developed in Canada for Canada. Genes that truly fit their farms. But SeedCan also works with international partners who develop new traits vital to making modern agriculture more efficient and sustainable. Combining these technologies with the best genetics is key to our collective future, and it has made SeedCan the largest supplier of certified seed in Canada. Since SeedCan operates as a not-for-profit, both farmers and plant breeders know that when a variety is distributed through SeedCan, they are dealing with a partner that maximizes the value they receive. That's what makes SeedCan Canada's seed partner.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Todd Hyra, and I'm pleased to have SeedCan sponsor SeedTalk 2023. Thanks so much for all of the support that SeedCan members and retailers have provided to SeedCan products and the brand over the last several years. As Canada's seed partner, collectively, we have, in the video, it mentioned $100 million returned to research. In reality, as of 2023, it's $144 million that have been contributed back to R&D in Canada in the form of royalties and research contributions. So thanks for everyone's part in doing that and continuing to invest in research in Canada. On behalf of the Western team, that includes Trent and Lauren and Mira and Brad and our science team, the R&D group of Ron and Jim, I wish you all the best for a successful 2023 season and a safe and smooth spring. So take care. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Todd. We really appreciate the support we're getting from SeedCan and helping us to get educational information out to our members and the industry at large. Your support is really appreciated. I have the next opportunity that we have from a sponsor is our support from Vigour. And if I could ask for the presentation of their video next. Thank you.
Bayer Crop Science is ready for takeoff. With more investment in research and development, more innovative solutions, more cutting-edge products, and more ways to excel from seed to harvest. From our new DeKalb corn and canola hybrids and soybean varieties that can take your yields to new heights, to our out-of-this-world seed protection with Buteo Start, providing superior flea beetle protection right from the start, to our state-of-the-art trait technologies, including TrueFlex canola with Roundup Ready and Liberty Link technologies, with the ability to use 2 best-in-class herbicides, to our latest herbicides that deliver unstoppable weed control for cleaner fields and greater peace of mind. Saray, your ally in the fight against wild oats. To our new lineup of can't-be-beat fungicides that help deliver improved grain quality, higher yield potential, and maximize ROI. Procero Pro, the new standard for fusarium head blight, ergot, and leaf disease protection. Proline Gold, providing outstanding sclerotinia protection even in high disease pressure situations. And Tillmore, the flex timing specialist that lets you spray from flag leaf to heading. Launch your next season with Bayer Crop Science. We've got the right stuff for your fields and your yield.
Good morning. Thank you to Bayer as well. Our sponsors are a critical piece of bringing presentations like this together. Their support is greatly appreciated. We had Bayer sponsorship in both from both Alberta and Saskatchewan, and again, we really appreciate that. Our next speaker this morning is Sarah Foster. And I'd like to provide you a little bit of background on Sarah. She's an internationally accredited seed analyst. Sarah has been involved in the seed industry since the late 1970s. With an early passion for plants, she has grown her background in botany into a leadership role in seed testing, seed physiology, crop production, crop inspection, and Industry Policy International. She strongly believes in bringing the new ideas and innovations into the lab and the field for clients. She studied and qualified as an accredited seed analyst at the National Institute of Agricultural Botany in Cambridge, England. Her career began as a seed analyst at Sharp Seed International in the UK, and later, after immigrating to Canada in 1984 with the United Grain Growers. In 1989, Sarah started 2020 Seed Labs Incorporated after Agriculture Canada began to privatize seed testing. 2020 Seed Labs continues to be a highly accredited independent lab with 3 locations with industry-leading innovations, including research trials and novel testing. 2020 Seed Labs has grown to over the last 34 years, and along with the Nisku location, they provide services in both Winnipeg and Chile. 2020 Seed Labs is an authorized ISTA laboratory and CFIA accredited, along with holding membership in Seeds Canada, CSGA, and SCST, oh man, and ISSF. Sarah was the recipient of the Canadian Seed Trade Association 2015 Seed Achievement Award, and in 2017 received an Outstanding Service Achievement Award from the Association of Alberta Seed Plants. In 2018, Sarah was a winner of the Business Edmonton and Business Calgary Entrepreneur of the Year. She's held various executive positions with the Commercial Seed Analysts Association of Canada, including the National President. As a technical auditor, Sarah is also involved with many committees, associations, and International Seed Testing Association. Sarah, if you would just maybe provide a morning greeting while I bring up your presentation. Now, Sarah, you've got to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
There we go. Take it away.
Excuse me. Thank you, Kelly. I've had a cold this week, and I sincerely hope that my voice lasts. Those of you that know me, I'm very passionate about seed, and I love to talk about it. So I hope that I can get through the next 15 minutes. As I say, thrilled to be here on the SeedTalk Prairies. Seeing Alison and Steve, you've probably gathered, people that are watching, there's a very common thread. Not only are we from England and Scotland, well, England, we all have shared a long career together and have followed each other's path. I was thrilled to be invited to speak about Seed Vigour because it's a topic that I'm very passionate about and I've been an advocate for since the late 70s. Excuse me. I met Alison sometime around 1976 in England at Charles Sharp's seed testing laboratory. And we were an early part of the CD testing that she was working on. So you can imagine when I came to Canada, Vigour was something that I felt we needed here. And so I worked along with a number of different industry people and have developed methods that work for them. If you could advance to the next slide. Thank you, Kelly. So I hope when I speak about seed testing from a laboratory's perspective, I'm covering everyone's perspective that has a laboratory. And so we're governed as an accredited lab by rules and regulations, standards, modernization, and needs for Vigour testing that are continuing to grow. So I'm going to be talking about these topics in more detail. So Vigour testing in Canada is based on the use of the Association of Official Seed Analysts Handbook, the International Seed Testing's Handbook for Vigour test methods, and although the Canadian Food Inspection Agency doesn't have anything in terms of a standard for rules and regulations around Vigour testing, we are at liberty to use the International Seed Testing Association rules or the AOSA. That has always been available to us. So what I'd like to say is that as far as the Canadian Food Inspection Agency in Canada, most of us are accredited for purity, germ, and smut, or purity or germ together. And not everybody does all of those things, but the accreditation is limited to that. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So I'd like to have a discussion because Vigour and the demand for Vigour testing is growing. And we can probably leave this until the end, but just to give you an idea of what's happening at the moment. CFIA have given the Canadian industry an opportunity to talk around modernising, seed regulatory modernisation. And I was lucky enough to sit on the seed testing task team. And it was brought up a number of times that there needed to be more standards around Vigour testing for Canada. And as I say, we're already at liberty to be able to use the ISTA methods. So there was the idea that and this has been going on for a long time, that we either harmonise or adopt those methods. Steve had mentioned in his presentation that, it can take a very long time to bring a standard method into a procedure. So there are a lot of tests that are available to us that are working very, very nicely in Canada. And I think if we went the route of either ISTA or AOSA, there would be an opportunity to provide training for analysts, proficiency testing, and bring a standardized process into the fold. And that way, every lab would be doing exactly the same thing. we could move on, Kelly, thank you. So there's standards for uniformity in testing in any capacity, whether it's purity, germination, or vigor. And it's very important because the tests have to be meaningful and convenient for analysts to be able to adopt for different stakeholders. So when I say meaningful and convenient, it has to mean something to the end user, and convenient that it doesn't take a long time to do and done under a specific standard. The tests obviously have to be reproducible between analysts in the same lab and between other labs. Everyone wants something that's inexpensive, and obviously it has to be accurate. And fundamentally, it has to correlate with field conditions if we're talking about vigor, but to some extent also with germination. And when we sell seed in Canada, we have to meet the germination standards at time of sale. So there is a shelf life essentially for germination, and it's important that we're testing close to the time of sale. So all of the tests that we do, as I say, regardless of purity or germination or vigor, are critically important to our customers, such as agronomists and seed growers and growers of high value crops, multinationals, researchers and farmers. And we all touch on working with these folks. I'm just referring to a note here just to make sure I've got everything. Okay. Kelly, you can, thank you, that's fine. The seed quality components that we're typically looking for in germination there's many actually, and environmental factors during the time that the seed is growing, the plants are growing, has a big impact on the quality at the end of the day. And we typically see a number of, different situations throughout the season. So on the top left-hand side is a picture of wheat germination. You can see there's some pathogens there, could possibly be fusarium, but an analyst isn't trained to be able to see that on the paper, on the germination paper. But obviously this particular lot has been affected and it is causing some issues with the germination. So when we do a germination, we're looking for the total capacity of that seed lot to provide normal seedlings under optimum conditions. When we see field emergence and uniformity, the slide at the bottom with the peas, you could see here that there's obviously some issues with mechanical damage. And when we see mechanical damage, it's usually quite severe. And in this case, you can see the seeds to the right have got lots of splits, cracks, and it's affected the growing points of the pea. And it's only the 3 on the left-hand side that are normal. So if you were, and this is done again in optimum conditions in the laboratory, this is a germination test. And you can see that this would not potentially be a uniform lot. And it certainly isn't going to store for very long. And again, up on the top right-hand side, there's some root damage. This has possibly been caused by the use of a desiccant, and obviously has impacted the ability of the root. And again, this could potentially affect storage, because we know that in the presence of toxicity, the seed lot can deteriorate very, very quickly in storage. And on the right-hand side at the bottom, this is a typical example of frost. And again, Frost is something that we need to be aware of in a germination test, because frost essentially ruptures the seed cells, and it can work to affect the storageability, and not only the storageability, but storageability, but its ability to develop into a normal plant. So all of these tests that we do have been refined to a very high level of reproducibility and done under very strict guidelines. We do lots of proficiency testing, and all of this work is done under accreditation. Kelly, if you could move to the next one, please. So when we look at seed vigor testing, there's certain aspects that we're looking for. A customer asking for a vigor test wants to know how it's going to perform in the field, or what's the storage life of this and the longevity of it. And as I go into the presentation deeper, I'll get a little bit more detailed on this. But there are aspects that we look at, things like what kind of test parameters should we be looking at, dependent on how the customer wants to use this seed. Rate and uniformity of seed germination and seedling growth, field performance, including the rate and uniformity of seedling emergence, and performance after storage and transport. So as an example, all of this can be affected by certain detriments in the quality of the seed. Things like physical damage, which include broken and shriveled, cracked seed coats, frost, heating, and stress. And if you just cast your mind back to the previous slide, one of the things where we see broken and cracked peas, they nearly always become mechanically damaged and are considered abnormal. And then the physiological aspect of vigor and how that impacts vigor is very important. It's things like age and maturity. So the age of the seed, the maturity of the seed. Seed can deteriorate a lot quicker in poor storage conditions. And vigor, the vigor of seed can deteriorate much quicker or earlier than you start to see it happening in the germination test. Respiration, genetic traits, hormonal changes, and changes in enzyme activity are all a part of what affects vigor. If you go to the next slide, please. So just a little example here. Germination testing alone can tell you a lot, but it can't tell you everything. Because when you're testing to optimum conditions, pretty well most things always grow. And we're not looking at the length of the seedling in the same way that we look at it in a vigor test. And this is where I stress how important vigor testing becomes, because when we turn our eyes to a vigor test and we compare it with a germination test, we can start to see that we can rank higher performing seed lots by seeing different quality attributes, such as some of the quality issues that I showed you on the previous slide, like the mechanical damage, the frost, and those types of things. And when we get into vigor testing, we're providing a more sensitive index, and the tests are done under very strict conditions. Now, the reasons for testing, there are many. I mean, obviously, we have clients that have marketing needs in different areas. You know, promotion goes into it, and research, obviously. all over the world. And when I say research, it's people that are breeding and selecting certain genetic traits for high Vigour seed. We need to be able to select a Vigour test that suits the needs of the client or the sector. And I think today when folks are asking for a Vigour test, they just ask for Vigour. They're not realizing that there's a selection of different Vigour tests that will give them different, not necessarily different results, but will round out the whole picture of what the quality of the seed is and how it will perform in your area. And it's always important too, because when we do different Vigour tests, the quality of the seed can be impacted by different types of Vigour tests. So we're drawing out important information about how that seed's going to perform. So we can't tell the entire story with just one test. And the other key piece here is that input costs for farmers and growers today are at an all-time high. Seed's expensive, and no one wants to make a mistake come seeding time or have the wrong information. We've gone away pretty well. There's not everybody's doing this, but we don't do pounds. We don't seed by the pound per acre so much anymore. We're looking at seed as a unit in the soybean world and the corn world. And the canola companies are doing 1,000 seeds per gram and looking at being able to seed very, very precisely with the results they get either from the germination or the Vigour test. And I would hope that it's done by both. If you could move on to the next. Thank you. So, as I was saying, there's a number of different tests that are available, and Steve spoke to the tests that are validated by ISTA. And I've got that list here. And these are all that we do in our laboratory for Canadian customers under ISTA, under ISTA rules and ISTA parameters. And we always make sure when we're dealing with our customers that they're made aware of what it is that they're getting. And of course, now time over time, we have a list of, you know, what it is that the customer wants. But it's very important that they understand what it is that they're actually getting to be able to use it properly. And it's usually around whether there's a stress condition or they're going to be storing seed or they want a viability test. If you go to the next one, Kelly. So I'd like to acknowledge Tim Gatormson's lab, SODAC, in South Dakota. He provided me with a couple of slides. And so this is probably one of the oldest Vigour tests that is available and has been available for many, many years. And it was initially created, or what's the word I'm looking for? It became about as a result of hybrid corn in breeding programs. And it's later gone on to be one of the most widely used in the US, and it's actually being used in Manitoba. And it has 3 different types of stresses. So there's the cold stress, which is the 10 degrees. There's the fact that it can go into respiratory stress because there's a lack of oxygen, because it's a very wet test. So, you know, the seed is often covered or surrounded by quite a bit of water. So it gives you an idea that, you know, this works for cold, wet conditions. And it's also a very good predictor of longevity as well. The principle behind this is that it can actually start imbibition chilling injury, which we would hope that if the seed is strong, will grow through it. So essentially, the tests are set up by chilling the water on the paper prior to the test a day before to make sure it's actually going into cold conditions. You can add other stresses by incorporating soil from the field that may or may not have pathogens. And it's mostly used with sand, and it's usually sterile sands in the laboratory, not to complicate things, but it has been requested, you know, that we add the extra stresses onto the seed with the soil and with pathogens in it. And this test has been able to fine-tune production, because corn is a unit, it's sold as a unit. And what people are looking for is that emergence that's rapid and uniform. And this test has certainly done that when going into cold, wet soils. If you could move on, thank you. Again, the accelerated aging, an older test. It's been around for a number of years. This is more suited to looking at longevity in storage, and it's primarily used for corn and soybean. And again, this is a test that we do in Manitoba, and it's been a very common test, a very useful test. And it's also very useful for the soybean growers, because it has that aspect of looking, and this is what it is, the aspect of looking at the longevity in storage, because soybean is a high oil content seed and it can go rancid during storage. So this is able to predict how long the storage life could be. And again, it's grown in trays of sand. And what we're looking for is how this seed can withstand high humidity and high heat. And it's a very precise test. So water is put on the inner chamber, so that in that plastic box, there'll be a layer of water. And then that sits underneath this basket with a layer of seed on top, and then a lid put on top. And then it's put into the water jacketed chamber, which is recommended either by AOSA or I don't believe ISTA have that requirement, but I'm sure today there probably is. But we all operate with very similar equipment. So then it's the seed is put into the chamber, and it's operating at 41 to 45 degrees, depending on the species. And it's, I call it cooked, but its process time, aging time, can be anywhere from 48 hours to 144 hours. And again, depends on the species. And once it's gone through that technique, it is then grown as a normal germination would be grown. And it's important to do the test very quickly within the time that it comes out of the chamber. And this really is a very stressful test, in that it's also aging, not just aging the seed, but it's deteriorating the seed, and it's deterioration that comes with aging. Kelly, if you go to the next one. So I'm going to go away just briefly from the standard tests that we have in ISTA. This by no means is an ISTA test, but this is a test that we've been using since the early 90s. It's our cold test that we use primarily on wheat. And I believe that this is a very good contender to be standardized. We were asked by industry to develop this test, and we based it at that time on recommendations from Alberta Ag for a low temperature seeding. So this is operating at 5 degrees. And we have had tremendous success with this. It's been, as I say, industry driven, and it's well understood. And we've been able to pull out lots that in germination are high performing because when they're grown in optimum conditions, we're not necessarily seeing that there's going to be an issue or there is an issue. But this test has pulled those attributes that, you know, we want to see out. And as I say, it has extremely good merit, and it's been widely used here in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Kelly, if you could go to the next one. So this is controlled deterioration, and this is one that Dr. Alison Powell had a lot to do with back in the 70s. And it's widely used in Canada for canola. And it's probably, in my opinion, one of the most stressful tests that you could ever impose on seed. In the presence of high humidity and high heat, that's when the seed essentially starts to panic, and the respiration is affected, and it's that's starting to deteriorate and age the seed. It's very precise, and takes practice. And as Steve said, you have to become very practiced with it because it is such a sensitive test. The method essentially is to weigh the seed sample, determine the moisture content, and equilibrate the seed to 20%, so that the whole lot that you're testing is at 20%. And it is then held at 10 degrees so that the equilibration can happen. And then it's put into a chamber operating at 45 degrees. And this can be from 24 hours to 48 hours, depending on the criteria, but it's generally around 24 hours. And then once that 24 hours is up, it's taken out of the chamber, the moisture content is determined again, and then it's planted within an hour of it being taken out of the chamber. And it's essentially planted just like a germination. We follow the germination methods for this. And then we would run another germination alongside of it that hasn't had any of this deterioration conducted on it. It's become, in my mind, a very good tool for the industry. And it's something that we use quite widely. And what we're seeing is that the results from the Vigour test correlate much better with field emergence than the germination alone would do. If you go on to the next slide, Kelly. And then, as Steve had said, radical emergence. This is new. This is a new test that's been introduced recently. It's been used on canola, corn, radish, and wheat. And I've got experience with it in canola and wheat. And what we're looking for essentially is that rapid, uniform germination that happens in a synchronous way, in that every seed is doing the same thing at the same time. And what we're looking for is it's like the germination test, as Steve said, in that there's no stress on it. What we're looking for is how quickly can these seeds break the surface. And what we're looking at is that the wheat generally takes around 48 hours to get to a 2 millimeter growth stage. And what we're looking for is that all the radicle and the colorizer are present. And with the canola test, we're looking at it after 30 hours and making sure that the seed coat has broken and that the radicle is protruding. And here you can see on the wheat, most of the wheat has germinated, and again on the canola, most of the canola has germinated, and they're all doing the same thing at the same time. And what we're learning from this test, it's not only quick, but it's giving you that rapid and uniform emergence that growers are looking for. And I often think, you know, this probably will be a good contender for the vegetable market, for people growing high value crops. Because I always think about, and I've said this many times before, I always think about the lettuce grower in California looking down the row and wanting to see a uniform row of lettuce heads that are all the same size, they've developed at the same rate, and they're harvested once, and that's what you want to do. You want to be able to see this uniformity among your stand. If you go on to the next slide, please. Now, this tetrazolium staining is a little different than everything else that we do. The tests that I've talked to you about so far are based on stress and aging. And with tetrazolium chloride, we've typically used it for viability. So when a person's looking for a germination test quickly, this is what we do. And I should quickly say that this is not accepted in Canada. It's not part of the standards or accreditation. And that's something I think that, you know, again, would be a good conversation around seed regulatory modernization. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory what's happening here. We use a 0.1 solution of tetrazolium chloride, which is a soluble salt, and it stains the seed pink or red, or not at all. So if it's not staining the embryo and all the important areas of the seed, it's clearly going to be dead. And in this case, it's probably old seed that's deteriorated and died off. And on the right-hand side, you can see that a nice pink and all the important areas of the embryo have stained. And as I say, we have typically used this as a viability test, and compared to a germination, we're generally plus or minus 5% of the actual germination. But it has been used for Vigour. And again, it's a quick test that can move product to the market in a Vigour situation. And when we're looking at it from a Vigour standpoint, we look at it a little differently than we do for viability, because we're looking for time of staining. So if the seed stains quickly, it's not vigorous because it's either bruised or damaged or cracked, and the stain is taken up very quickly. So we're looking for a nice longer period of staining, and generally speaking, pink, the lighter pink color tends to be the seed that's more vigorous. And again, it's one of these tests that you've got to be very specific about, and it needs a lot of practice. And it has shown a lot of merit when practiced for the use in Vigour testing. And the results are reported as a percentage. Steve mentioned that Dr. Alison Powell also was very key in developing the electrical conductivity for field peas in England. And her work has been a huge contribution to the Pulse Grower Research Organisation in the UK. And it is, again, a test that needs to be practiced. It's very useful on a number of different crops, I believe, but it's primarily one that we would only really use on peas. I know that it has been used on canola. So the principles behind it are as when you soak seed, and it has to be precise, you have to use deionized water at 20 degrees C, and leave it in the water covered for 24 hours and at 20 degrees C. And 24 hours later, you pour the peas out, take the soap water and do an electrical conductivity reading, and the results are measured in micromoles per gram. Now, more mechanical damage, broken seed, that type of thing will release leachates into the water. And those leachates are sugars, starches, carbohydrates, enzymes, that type of thing. And we can pick that up, that's in the soap water, with the electrical conductivity meter. And because the results are expressed in micromoles per gram, there's a 4 Vigour factor that Steve had shown you. So it's looking at, is it suitable for early sowing, high vigor, early sowing with some risk, moderate vigor, or not sowing at all, because the seed is damaged and it's aged or it's deteriorated. And we often find there's a correlation here, and certainly have in the past, when there's a lot of mechanical damage, we'll pick up higher readings of leachates. We want to avoid planting mechanical damage seed because when they leach sugars and starches into the soil, it can have an effect on how the pathogens will move to the abnormal seed, and essentially could affect the normal seed. And that's certainly true in different soil types, like grey wooded or anything with a lot of trash, essentially, because there's lots of pathogens on trash in the soil. You move on to the next one, please. I was actually expecting one more. This is why Kelly's running my presentation. We've had a little bit of a formatting issue. This is it, I'm done. Excuse me, thank you so much for attending the SeedTalk Prairies, and I'll be around for questions at the end. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Sarah. We appreciate all the information. I'm just going to make note of a couple of things. If you are interested in getting a copy of Sarah's presentation, we can provide that, actually 2020 would like to provide that to you directly. If you can contact them, I've got an email address for you. I'll say it, but I'll also include it as an answer in the Q&A, or rather the chat, so that you can copy it down. It's Shannon, and that's spelled SHANYN at 2020 seedlabs.ca. Again, I'll include that in the chat so you've got it. And we have also a note for the Q&A, and I'm just going to read it out in case you've been paying attention and did not see the chat that was sent out. By all means, we encourage questions. However, we're going to leave answering them till much later in the program. If you would ask your questions in one of two formats, to type in the question into the Q&A, and if it's specific to one of our speakers, please include that in your question. They can either type you an answer in the Q&A or answer the question live later in the program. If you want to speak, raise your hand and we will unmute you so that you can be heard. And that we will encourage you to do again later in the program once we open the general question and answer. Thanks so much. Now we would like to hear from Lewis and Carter.
Hi, everyone. It's Jennifer Seabird from the Manitoba Seed Growers taking over this section of hosting the webinar this morning, I guess afternoon, if you're where I am. Our next speaker is a seed grower from Manitoba here in Canada. I know there's some international folks on the webinar today, so I'm addressing them. Quick bio for Tracy. She is a second generation seed grower who, along with her parents, operate Court Seeds in the Plumas area of Manitoba. She's a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture with a focus on agronomy and spent 5 years in the industry before deciding to join the family seed business in 2013. Tracy has 10 years of seed growing experience and is currently serving as a director on the Manitoba Seed Growers Association. And I'll add, she's blazing a trail. She's the first female director on our board. So we're excited to have her. I can go ahead, Tracy.
Okay, thank you, Jen, for that introduction. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm excited to see how many people have actually decided to tune in today. So just to start off, I want to say that I'm very out of my league here. Being asked to speak after people like Steve, Allison, and Sarah is a little intimidating. So I don't have any background in seed testing. My background is in agronomy and seed production. So this presentation is going to have a little bit of a different feel to it. The goal of the presentation here is simply to offer a perspective on why we test for seed vigor, to explain some of the benefits that I see for our seed business and for our customers. And then at the end of the presentation, I have a little bit of just some historical data on German Vigour from our farm. So just a really brief background about our operation. So Our farm name is called Court Seeds. We've been producing pedigreed seed in the central Manitoban region since about 1982. So the business was originally started by Randy and Janine Court. I joined the business in 2013, and since then we've undergone some significant expansion, and we now have four full-time staff. Currently, we're farming right around 5,800 acres. In any given year, roughly 60% of that is in pedigreed seed production, and the balance would be in commercial canola. And we also utilize contract growers as needed to meet our seed needs. So our main focus is spring cereals. Wheat, barley, and oats would probably make up 80% of our seed production acres on any given year. We also grow yellow peas, soybeans, and winter cereals. But you'll see some of the data that I pulled today is mostly focused on those spring cereals because that is where our business focuses on. We do have our own seed cleaning facility on site. So we grow the seed, we process it, and then we also retail. Our retail business consists of bulk pedigreed seed, custom seed treating, and as well as bagged products like canola and corn. So our customers, we're a mix of retail and wholesale. I'd say on average, we're 60 to 70% retail, with the balance of that being in wholesale. We've certainly seen a trend towards larger farm sizes. I think that's pretty standard across all of Western Canada. And a lot of these farms are utilizing agronomists now. So we're dealing less and less with the main farm owner and more so with these agronomists. Agronomists often request both germ and vigor. They seem to be very knowledgeable in that field and kind of what the differences are between them. Farmers are maybe a little bit less aware, but we do see that changing. So more and more people are ordering seed in plants per acre versus the old bushels per acre. This makes me very happy to see, with something I've been encouraging for years. Seed is a very expensive investment, and you really need to be paying attention to those plant populations if you want to maximize your return. I find Vigour is a very useful tool for determining seeding rates. With the testing that we do, we're trying to replicate the spring conditions. So basically taking a seed lot and trying to estimate how that seed lot's going to perform when you actually put it in the ground in the springtime. We also can look at these Vigour results and help our growers make seed treatment decisions. Obviously, Vigour doesn't give you all the answers on whether it's disease related or weathering or seed coat breakage or things like that. But through our background knowledge of how it was produced on the farm, we can certainly make seed treatment recommendations based on what we suspect is going on there. So with respect to Vigour testing, I estimate that we've been testing for Vigour since about the mid-2000s. Unfortunately, I don't have very good records going back from before then, but I suspect it's been at least 20 years of Vigour testing on our farm. We only test on the clean sample, not on the harvest sample. And the main reason for this is I think a lot of those poor germ and poor Vigour seeds are going to be cleaned out during that processing. Other reason is you want to give the chance the seed to cool down, and so that you break some of that dormancy that might be present right after harvest. So currently, the lab that we use performs what they term as a cool stress test on all of our seed lots. So based on Sarah's presentation, that may not be a standard thing amongst all the labs. It seems like maybe each lab might have their own procedures for performing that test. And some of the data I'm going to show you shortly is it's all data from the same lab, so we can I only pulled that data so that we can compare apples to apples here. The reason why we choose to use the pool stress test is, like I said, just trying to replicate those spring seeding conditions. While germination is a really good indicator of what the seed's maximum potential is, it doesn't really give you that good perspective of what's going to happen in the spring. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I don't wait till my soil is 20 degrees before we start planting. So this is the ultimate goal of when we do a Vigour test. Our results have been very consistent for cereal crops. What you'll see in a couple slides is that the consistency certainly drops off as you get into poor quality seed with low germs. But for the most part, we do see consistency. Pulse crops is something that's still fairly new to our farm, so I don't have a whole lot of data on it, but it does seem to be less consistent. So perhaps maybe this isn't the best test to be using for pulse crops. I can't really speak to that, but well, we will be focusing on the cereal crops here. Once again, Vigour doesn't tell the whole story. We need to know the background information, and as a seed grower, you have that information. You know how it was grown in the field. Was there disease issues? Was there frost? Mechanical issues, things like that. So really, you gotta combine the germ and Vigour test results with your background knowledge of the seed lot and how it has been handled and what it's experienced up until this point. And once again, the number one reason why we're doing all this testing is really for our customers. We want to be as transparent as possible with them. When we send a seed lot out the door, our reputation is tied to that seed lot, and so you don't know what you don't know, I guess. So by doing all this testing, we're really trying to make sure our customers have all the information they need to make the management decisions for their farm. And this might include things like adjusting their seeding rates or using seed treatment, or maybe even finding a different seed source altogether. Okay, so these are our Vigour test results broken down by crop. So this is specific to our farm. This is very raw data. There's been no statistical analysis done on this, so just take it with a grain of salt. I only went back to 2015 because that was when we switched labs. So all of these results are done with the same lab, and all of these crops were grown on our own farm. So first of all, you'll notice a very general trend. From 2015 up to 2020, we've seen a gradual increase in our Vigour test results. I definitely attribute this to our weather patterns. This area of Manitoba was extremely wet, starting in about 2010 up until 2017. So those specifically on this chart, 2015 and 2016 were very tough years for us. Late started in the spring for seeding, which pushed harvest back. We definitely saw a lot more disease in those years. And yeah, just probably a lot more weathering on the seed. So I think that is really reflected in this chart. One thing that really struck me as surprising, I guess, is how variable the oats germ is. I don't know if I have a good answer for this, other than I suspect it's probably our management practices on our farm. Oats tends to be one of the last crops that we put in, and probably one of the later ones that get harvested. And we all know that oats are susceptible to weathering late in the fall. So I suspect maybe that is what's going on, but I can't say for sure. On the wheat side of it, I do attribute this trend in Vigour to being disease related. Farming in central Manitoba, we have a lot of fusarium, which we did see, it got pretty severe in those wet years. And I think because we had so many wet years in a row, I think we had a lot of disease inoculum in the soil, which I kind of carried through for a few years after it turned dry. But that's kind of the story on wheat. Barley was a bit of a surprise to me. It seems to be extremely consistent year after year, and maybe that is due to our management practices as well, because we do tend to plant barley early and harvest it early. Okay, so this next slide, what I've done is I've kind of broken it down by what I consider to be the wet years on our farm versus the dry years. So the blue lines there are 2015 to 17, which were, I'd say, above average rainfall. And then the 18 to 21, we got extremely dry, particularly towards in 2020 and 21. So across the bottom, I got the 3 different crop types, and then the German Vigour for each one. What I find interesting is that germination, like let's take oats for example here, you really don't see any difference. If you were only doing a germ test on these lots, you would not know that there was any difference in seed quality there at all. And yet when we run the Vigour test, it's pretty dramatic. We are seeing Vigour drop off significantly in those wetter years versus in the drier years. We did see germination fall. It matches up with Vigour fairly good, and I do think this is probably disease related, as I mentioned earlier. And then once again, barley seems very, very consistent. Germination and Vigour seems high every year. So this is really just for entertainment purposes. I don't know how to analyze this data. That's not my job. So this is just some really interesting trends that I saw show up on our farm when I crunched the raw data. So then finally, this is only our spring wheat results. And I only pulled spring wheat out because that was the one I had the most amount of data points on and the widest range in germination. So just to explain what you're looking at here, across the top, we have the different germinations kind of grouped together from high germ to low germ. And then the Vigour, the bar represents the Vigour relative to that germination. So what we can see is on our very high germing lots that were like 94% and above, quite often Vigour was within about 2 percentage points. So in those cases, maybe there wasn't a lot of value in running that Vigour test. But as we got into some lower quality seed, we certainly saw the Vigour test get much more unpredictable, and we did see a wide range. Particularly in that 85 to 90% germ, the Vigour really, really drops off quickly. So that's pretty much covers my presentation. Just a few takeaways I'd like to leave you with here. Germination and Vigour, they appear to have a very close relationship when the seed quality is high. As that seed quality drops off, Vigour becomes less predictable, and I think that's where the value really comes in testing Vigour, is just to see what else is going on behind the scenes maybe. The Vigour decreases more rapidly under unfavorable conditions than germination does. And so I think we need to consider Vigour test results when assessing seed lots and when setting seeding rates. But then, like I said earlier, this doesn't paint the whole picture. We need to be analyzing what is going on with those Vigour tests when we do get a low Vigour result. Do we suspect it's disease? Do we suspect it's weathering or some kind of mechanical damage? And maybe we need to make some management decisions based on that. Just kind of throw back to what Sarah covered in her presentation. Just be aware of what Vigour tests you're getting. I was shocked at how many different Vigour tests there are. And you got to find what works for your seed, what's going to replicate your spring conditions best. So the final point I want to leave you with here, just that Vigour testing, I feel, can help make more informed decisions for your seed business. When you get a seed lot with poor Vigour, it gives you the opportunity to stop and ask, should this seed lot be sold? Like, is there steps that we should be taking to remedy the seed lot? Perhaps it needs to be cleaned again, or maybe it should be sold with a seed treatment on it. And then finally, just conveying all of this information to your customers, I think helps build a lot of trust. The fact that you are maybe admitting to them that you maybe don't have the highest quality seed, it helps them set very realistic expectations of what they're going to get when they put that seed in the ground next year, and ultimately allows them the opportunity to make management decisions, maybe increasing seeding rates or finding different seed sources. And I think that goes a long way into building respect and trust with your customers. Ultimately, we're trying to eliminate any surprises in the field. So that concludes my presentation. I have included my email address there if anyone wishes to contact me. And I just want to thank you all for tuning in today.
Excellent. Thank you, Tracy. That was a great perspective on how real-time results can support the farmers. We have one more sponsor video to run, and then we'll move into a panel discussion.
What is the role of a modern seed testing laboratory today? First and foremost, we are here to protect the client, the end user. Whether the seed is tested for small-scale home gardening or seed bought from a corporate distribution point and used to seed hundreds of thousands of acres for commercial production, it is tested in an accredited and registered facility. Regardless of the end use, every seed tested by 2020 Seed Labs is tested under strict rules and regulations of the applicable government. For example, domestic seed is tested according to Canadian Food Inspection Agency standards, and seed destined for export is tested under the International Seed Testing Association. Our fundamental role is to scientifically determine seed quality and value for planting, of which the results will enable producers to label seed quality information for the marketplace. Labeling a product for use is important, but so is determining seeding rates, time of planting, time of harvest, success of cleaning and conditioning, and longevity in storage. A seed testing facility like ours is the one-stop hub for all of our clients' needs. Seed producers used to depend primarily on official state seed laboratories. However, today there is more dependence on private laboratories for their service testing. Our client base has expanded to service the seed industry to certified seed growers and farmers, gardeners, homeowners, and nurseries. And we're also proud to contribute towards research where we coordinate with breeding programs as well as assist with preserving existing genetic material. One of our fundamental roles is to conduct a germination test that will determine how the seed lot will perform in the field. So how do we ensure that the results we give you stand up in the field? Reproducible germination results require uniform test conditions. Seed testing rules prescribe standardization for everything from substrates, growing conditions to the evaluation of the seedling. In our establishment, we run a control or a check sample to detect if our equipment or staff are having an off day. Repeatability and accuracy give our end users the insurance for the quality of the seed, so that it can be bought and sold with confidence and ultimately perform in the field. Our role will continue to evolve as the world's expanding population is realizing that agriculture is the most important sector on the planet, and modern-day testing will continue to expand as it's needed.
Thank you again to 2020 Seeds for their sponsorship. We're going to now move into the moderated panel discussion. And Joanne Hinkey, who will introduce right shortly, we have some prepared questions that we will pose to the panelists, and then we're also watching the Q&A. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A or put your hand up, and we will get to those as we progress through the questions. We're really pleased that Joanne Hinkey agreed to act as moderator for this session. She started as a seed analyst trainee with what at that time was the Department of Agriculture, and thus began a lifelong passion for the field. After obtaining accreditation, she became engaged in training development and delivery for both governmental and non-governmental personnel. Over time, Joanne became the purity supervisor, and in this position, she became actively involved in quality management, which included responsibility for the quality and technical management of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's Seed Science and Technology section in Saskatoon, which is ISTA and ISO/IEC 17025 accredited. Joanne was also involved in auditing of seed labs nationally and internationally, oversight of the CFIA's seed laboratory accreditation program for seed labs and analysts and seed lab accreditation standards, the overall management of the Canadian methods and procedures for testing seed, and the National Seed Graders programs. She contributed to several national initiatives, including seed certification and seed grader programs, the foreign laboratory recognition, and the official seed sampler program. She also contributed to stakeholder initiatives such as the curriculum development, design, and implementation of a seed analyst short course for Olds College in Alberta, and for the Commercial Seed Analyst Association of Canada and other organizations. She was a member of the AOSA Rules Committee and the Board of Examiners. Since retirement, she has continued to be involved in areas such as lab audits, Canadian methods and procedures, training of seed analysts, and recently she acted as co-chair and participated in the seed testing task team for the seed regulatory modernization process. Again, thanks so much, Joanne, for agreeing to moderate this session.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to join you today and welcome everybody. I'm really hoping for a vigorous conversation today, unintended, and really encourage everybody to type your questions into the Q&A, as all questions are valuable. Thanks to our panelists, Steve, Allison, Sarah, and Tracy, for your very informative presentations. And this really helps us segue into the questions we have for you. Just a reminder, each panelist will have 2 minutes to answer the question that's directed to them. And the other panelists will be given an opportunity then to share their knowledge. At the end of the questions for our panelists, we'll then open it for the questions from the audience. So let us begin. Our first questions are addressed to Steve and Allison. And that is, can you give us a little more information? What's the difference between germination and vigor?
Well, I'll answer that one. It's very clear, germination is the best you can achieve from a seed lot under optimal conditions in the lab. So that's why we would have high levels of germination in most commercial seed. Vigor is a different property. This is a property of seed lots that have a high germination. And it reflects the ability of seed lots with high germination to perform in the field in non-optimal conditions, stress conditions. So if you have a high germination seed lot, which performs poorly in the field, this is low vigor. A high germination seed lot that performs well in the field, that is high vigor. Basically, vigor reflects the level of physiological aging of the seed. So you can sort of compare it to people. If you have a 16-year-old and a 60-year-old, both alive, but they may differ in what they're able to do physically, physiologically. So a high vigor seed would be a 16-year-old, a low vigor seed would be a 60-year-old. So really, germination is what happens in optimum conditions, vigor is what happens with the seed lots in non-optimal conditions.
Thank you very much. Be careful there, this 60-year-old here. But I agree.
Yeah, I know you have to be careful when you're looking at your audience and you've got a large one. Sometimes I've increased the age considerably.
Sarah, Tracy, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that's absolutely bang on. When you've got high germination, you hope that you're going to have high vigor as well, but it's often undetermined unless you actually do a vigor test. And a lot of times it goes unnoticed. And unfortunately, a grower or a farmer may plant a seed lot that he hasn't had a vigor on into stressful conditions, and is surprised to find out that it's not come up, either not come up at all, or it's come up very unevenly.
Tracy, would you like?
I think Allison covered it very well.
Great. So we'll move on to our next question, and this one's for Sarah. And it's how do environmental conditions during the growing season or storage impact vigor?
A lot. In fact, I'd say that environmental conditions are the number one reason why seed can be affected, and with that the vigor can be affected. So I mean, obviously what we're looking for is in good conditions. We want the seed to become physiologically mature, and when the seed is at its absolute peak, it's when it is mature, it's still on the plant, and it's just before harvest, and it's after that that it's starts to deteriorate or decline over time. I think it's huge, and it depends on the region, and with environmental conditions, particularly if it's there's a lot of wet conditions during flowering, that can lead to a lot of disease pressure, and that's another factor that goes into vigor. So it does affect it in a big way.
Tracy, got some thoughts?
Yeah, the biggest thing that we found that affects the vigor on our farm is the conditions at harvest time. Definitely, if anything delays harvesting that seed in a timely manner, those are the lots that we see the lowest vigor on. So whether that be disease or weathering, sprouting, it's really hard to say, but it's definitely the environment is the biggest factor.
Steve or Allison, do you want to add
I
anything?
agree. Yeah, I agree with those 2 points. But it might also be worthwhile saying that when seeds have been stored and they've been high quality seeds to go in to store originally, all seeds will age in store, even if their germination stays high. So when seeds are taken out of storage, they may have initially high germination and high vigor, but the germination may fall very quickly once they're removed from good quality store. But more importantly, the vigor will fall very rapidly before germination falls. So you have to be aware of the fact that though you may have stored seed well and they've got a high germination, when you take them out of store, they can deteriorate very, very quickly before they get to a farmer even.
Thank you. And our next question is for Tracy. And it's, what time of year do you test for vigor? For example, before fertilization can take effect or after?
Okay, yeah, when you're testing for vigor, I think the most important thing is that the sample that you're testing on represents what's going to be planted in the field that spring. So ideally you want to test it as close to springtime as possible. You want to make sure that any kind of dormancy that's been in that seed has been broken. And then also you want to make sure you're testing it on your clean sample and not your harvest sample, because that's ultimately what you're going to be selling to your customer. I do believe it is common practice for most labs to undergo procedures to try and break any dormancy that may still exist on the seeds. I'm sure Sarah could speak more to that, but I don't know if that's whether that's the same thing as letting it age in the bin and get cooled off appropriately. So definitely try and do that testing as close to spring as possible.
So I just want to ask a clarification question, Tracy. Am my understanding that when you would test for Vigour is it would be kind of coming to that time of year where you're deciding which lots you're going to actually plant this year?
Yeah, well, being that we do retail our seed, we do try and get a Vigour test done as soon as it's cleaned early on so that we can make those management decisions if the Vigour is no good. But yeah, if you suspect that maybe there's something going on with your Vigour test, certainly get it retested again closer to spring and see if there's been any changes.
Thank you. Yeah, Sarah, Steve, Allison, anything to add?
So I think the point that Tracy made was very good about getting the testing done when you've got your seed lot ready in storage or ready for sowing. The thing about dormancy, when you're testing in the lab, you do try to overcome any dormancy, but dormancy can be a confounding factor on the Vigour testing. So, but it's good to get them tested again at the different times, like Tracy said.
Thank you. So you're up next, Steve and Allison. So, excuse me, what is the allowable variance for a seed lab results using the same Vigour test?
So I'll take this one, and again, it depends on the Vigour test that you're going to use as to what parameters or the plus or minus percentages are. But if we use the radical emergence test as an example, in the ISTA rules, there are replicate tolerances. So, you're doing things in replicate. So there's an allowed tolerance to be able to issue a proper result. And then there's also tolerance tables in the ISTA rules for the Vigour testing to compare samples, either in the lab or between different samples taken at different times. So for example, for a repeat test, if you had an average result of 2 tests at 95%, it's allowed plus or minus 5%. That's the tolerance limit for the comparison to be comparable tests. And at 98% result, it's going to be tighter at plus or minus 3. And this is the same philosophy within all the ISTA tests that have been validated, that there are tolerance tables and a structured way to compare replicates and also to compare results.
Just another clarification. So you say tolerances for replicates or tolerances for all the tests. So the same would be there's tolerances for a germ test.
Yeah, they're very similar. And so, like for a 200 seed germ test, if you had a 95% result, you got limits a range of limits that are acceptable that produces that, and it's very similar for the Vigour test. And those tolerance tables are all standardized and in the ISTA rules.
I might just add that, in fact, for controlled deterioration and accelerated aging, we use some of the same tables as in the germination tolerances, because for both those tests we're using germination results.
Sarah or Tracy, anything that you'd like to add? So the next question is for Sarah. How do you interpret Vigour tests results?
So if I understand this, Joanne, is this how we would interpret the Vigour test and result to the customer?
I assume that, yes.
Okay. So most results are reported by percentage, with the exception of the electrical conductivity. And because there was some confusion around the way that the results were arrived at for the EC, there was a ranking put in place. So that's the P's are the only one that there's this ranking already in place. But with everything else, like the accelerated aging or the saturated cold, we report the results that we get, and reported as a percentage of the normal seeds that have gone through the stress test. And it is then up to, and these types of tests are generally done for large seed houses or multinationals. And they decide how they want to use those seed lots in comparison to a germination. And they do get a lot of the background information. So they'll know that there's disease present, or there's mechanical damage, or whatever it is, and we will have a consult with them if there's a problem. As far as the wheat, the cold test around wheat, or the radical emergence for wheat, again, it's a percentage. And the thing is, you've got to be able to discuss these result findings with your clients, because each Vigour test tells you something different, and it's drawing out a quality aspect of so one test will pull one quality aspect out, and another test will pull another one out. And generally, we're looking at seed that's gone through either a stress test or an aging test. So it's fairly not self-explanatory, but it's easy to understand once you've done the work several years in a row.
Thank you. Steve, Tracy, Allison, anything that?
It's worth saying that if you do a range of Vigour tests, all the Vigour tests will identify the same high Vigour and the same low Vigour lots. And it doesn't matter where you've given an aging, a stress test, or it's a part of a germination test. You'll always find that high Vigour lots are identified as different from the low Vigour lots. And this, I think, is why many seed companies will use several different Vigour tests on the same seed material, because it gives them confirmatory results. And therefore, they have more confidence, because the larger companies tend to be using the Vigour tests in their marketing and their storage decisions. So they want to be absolutely sure they've got the right answer.
Thank you. Tracy, the next question is for you. And have you found that there is consistency and repeatability within the testing results?
For the crops that we deal with, yes, I would say there is. But once again, your results are only as good as your sample. So you need to make sure that you have a consistent sampling method. And for us, we try to use the same lab and request the same tests on every sample, because you can't, it's only really good for comparing lots to each other. If you start getting one lot tested at this lab and another lot at a different lab, I don't think those results have a whole lot of value. But yes, I do find that there is consistency. Like I mentioned in my presentation, I do still struggle with the pulse crops a little bit more, but I don't quite have enough experience with that to know what's going on there.
Thank you. Steve, Allison, Sarah, would something else you'd like to add to that?
I think to get consistency, this is where the standardization of methods in different laboratories is important. You've highlighted that you always use one lab, that's fine. But if you had to use another lab, you might get different results, and they do the test slightly differently. So that's where standardization is important.
Sarah, anything?
Totally agree with what Alison said. And I think that's the confusion right now, is that some labs in Canada that are offering Vigour testing that aren't, part of AOSA or ISTA, are things that, perhaps, they've developed themselves and they've got really good history with it and it works. But, we often get compared to Lab B, or Lab C. And, it's important to mention that, the difference between a cool test and a cold test can be several degrees of temperature in testing, and it can make a huge difference. And if the customer doesn't know how the test is conducted, that 3-degree difference in a cool test compared to a cold test, it would be perhaps closer to the germination. It's not getting the same stress. So, this is where standardization, as Alison says, is really, really important.
Thank you. Our next question is for Steve and Allison. What are the impediments to creating a standardized test for Vigour?
So I know time's running short, so I try and keep the answers short to build on what we've said before, is that to be standard within one lab is good. And I think Tracy's approach to using the one lab is a good one. But for ISTA and export, you have to be able to compare labs across the world. So it's that idea of having published methods and PTs and training. And I think there's some questions in the chat from the audience, is that to ensure that standardization and development, you need to train labs, train people, and have proficiency tests and things that mean things to your conditions in your areas. So again, it's the validation data, the things that take the time to produce that.
Okay. I'm going to just jump into the next question for Sarah, because I think it's also segues into this one, and then the others on the panel have something that they would like to contribute to it. They can at that time. Sarah, how do you envision developing standardized methods with checks and balances in place to ensure that labs are compliant?
Good question. So if we wanted to develop a standardized method, I think that we all agreed on that was a good one for Canada. Let's just use that as an example. I think this is where you bring all the analysts together and we put our heads together and we decide on, you know, what would work in their lab. Do they have the equipment and that kind of thing? And then we would take it to the field. That's if we, you know, did it as a group, as a collaborative. And, you know, as Steve says, probably, you know, 5 years of research would be involved. And then assuming, you know, it was correlating nicely with, you know, what happens year over year, then, you know, there's a process of taking this to the Vigour committee in ISTA and asking, you know, if we can do that work, I think. And that's how I envisage doing that. But to be honest, I think right now we have enough ISTA and AOSA methods that have been validated and gone through the mill, and they're fine. And I think if we adopt those, I think we're further ahead. And I think that's really important to remember, that, you know, that as Steve says, they're done all over the world. And, you know, we have to have that uniformity in testing. So unless I have someone a client who wants something different, I don't know that there's a need for, you know, developing anything different just yet, because all the Vigour tests that are available are wide ranging. You know, that there's a different thing for every situation.
Good, thank you. I'm just gonna keep going on because we're getting kind of strapped for time. Tracy, what actions would you take if the seed law doesn't pass the Vigour test, but is sufficient for Canada #1 grade by all the other regulated parameters?
So I guess the first step is just trying to determine or identify what is causing that low vigor. And if, you know, being that you're growing the seed on your own farm, you probably have a pretty good indicator already of what's going on there. And then can it be remedied? Is there ways that we can improve the vigor? Maybe it just needs another pass through the cleaners. Maybe we need to be selling it with a seed treatment on. So just, yeah, there is always options. And then I guess finally, are there other good seed stocks available that we can draw from? Why sell a poor lot when I can just drive down the road and get a high quality lot from my neighbor, kind of thing? So in certain circumstances, it may mean just dumping the seed and replacing it with a better quality seed. These are all management decisions that you need to be making, and you can't make those decisions without a good quality Vigour test to base it off of.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna just go on to the next question. Right, what? Sorry.
Sorry, Joanna, we were just wondering at maybe we could just read the questions that we had prepped for the people, and then maybe move to answer some of the questions that are in the Q&A. We really appreciate everybody hanging on since we're over time. And so maybe if you just want to read those questions, and then people can keep those in mind when we start answering the questions from the audience.
Sure. So there's 3 questions left. And those are, what difference to the current lab tests for Vigour would standardization make? Should Vigour testing be regulated? Do you think that there's value in doing a Vigour test on seed lots? Do customers ask for Vigour tests specifically? And how many years have you been doing Vigour testing as an added customer service? And is the expense worth it? And I think in some of your answers, you've answered most of these questions, really. So, you want to move on to?
Sure, thanks, Joanne. Maybe we'll take some of the questions that were online. Rujing Wang, she had to leave early, but she did have some questions about, worst was, while using the international rules is a good start for Canadian tests, there might be gaps for Canadian crops such as wheat, barley, and canary grass. What would be an approach to develop more standard methods for Canadian crops?
I mean, if I could jump in there, I think Rojing's points and her second question about the training, we've kind of mentioned, or Sarah mentioned, that if Canada decided that they wanted to, if you like, be a champion of a crop, that could be worked on within the International Seed Testing Vigour Committee, and it could be worked on within Canada as being participants to that. So I think if there's a need, that could be identified and then worked on and start that process, because it will take, 3 to 5 years to get a standardized method that has been proven to work in the field conditions in Canada. I don't know if you wanted to add to that, Alison, as well.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, Steve, because within the committee, we've got 15 people. So there's a limit who are working voluntarily on Vigour for ISTA, as well as their own jobs. So there's a limit to how much work we can do and the number of species we can cover. But if people are very keen to have a test developed on a specific crop, they can contact us. And if they are prepared to do some of the work, we can give advice and plans about how they can go about doing it. But we can't work on every crop that everybody is interested in, because it's a limit to the number of hours in the day.
Thanks, Alison and Steve. Moving on to the next questions. Has anyone seen anything anomalous in Vigour test results in your crops from extreme heat events, i.e. the Western Canadian heat dome of 2021? Somebody want to tackle that one? Sarah, since you were in the middle of all that stuff, do you have any anything to add to that question? Oh, yeah. Jennifer. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thanks. I don't think so. Heat definitely has a huge impact on Vigour, especially while the seeds on the plants, and you will see seed shriveling and that kind of thing. But I don't remember ever seeing anything out of the norm. Not 2021.
Okay, thanks. Next question then, from Jenny Seward, and it may have already been answered in a way. Question for variety test types. How many are there? Are there certain ones that are best suited to types of crops?
Could I put a little word into that?
Of course.
I say, well, if you're talking about what I'd call grain legumes, peas, soybean, chickpeas, cowpeas, etc., any species that has a large living cotyledon, conductivity is the best. If you want to think about a test that has the widest applicability, I say the radical emergence test. And that has got the greatest potential for being applied to a very wide range of crops, because we've seen publications where it's been applied to many vegetable species, forage species, cereals, and also, excuse me, flower species. So that if I was going to develop any test for a new species, I'd always work first on radical emergence, because it's quick, it's easy, because you just use the same procedures as a germination test, and therefore people can very quickly develop it and use it.
Thank you, Alison. I missed the second question by Rojing. Standard method is one of 3 components of testing uniformity. How to address training on lab performance with standard monitoring as other tests with accreditation requirement. Did you already answer that, Steve?
In a way, I tried to, Laurie, to say I totally agree with Rojing that that you need labs to be involved to have uniformity. One of the challenges for ISTA is its worldwide reach, so that the proficiency tests go worldwide. But at the moment, the Canadian M&P and CFIA do a great job of providing proficiency tests for the regular germination tests and purity and percent other seeds. Whether CFIA could do that for Vigour tests in the future is debatable, because is it in seed regulations or is it going to be in seed regulations? So who has the mandate to arrange and pay and arrange that training and PTs? So that could be a bigger question for another time. But certainly you can have standardization of methodologies, and ISTA can try and help with that, and people agree in what they're going to follow. There are cold tests and other methods that people use, and then training and workshops and discussion forums like this can help the labs develop what the end users and people and the farmers and the growers need as well.
Thanks, Steve. There's a question from Morgan Webb for Alison. Western Canada has high seed dormancy. Could radical emergence be changed to add a dormancy breaking step?
I suspect this is what we're going to have to do. It's not something that we've looked at yet, because we've published radical emergence for wheat, but non-dormant wheat, because it was actually developed in an area of the world where dormancy doesn't exist. But we've had a little bit of a look at it, but I think it's something we really need to focus on, is how we include a dormancy breaking step into radical emergence. Might be included. It might have to be considered after dormancy's breaking has occurred and in the time after that, but it's something we have to work on.
Okay, thank you. Our final question comes from Michael Shuchuk, who is the gentleman who kind of started this whole conversation by resolution at the CSG AGM last year. 3 to 5 years of testing to come up with a standardized method seems extreme. As it was mentioned, any Vigour test type will identify a high Vigour lot and a low Vigour lot. This is all we need. Hopefully labs could agree on a method and go. I don't think we need to start from scratch here.
Well said. Good question. I think we have the tools and we've got the experts that are working, for us. Alison has always been a huge resource for us and has developed many tests that we're working on today. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And I just believe in standardization. And I think through that, we're doing our customers a service, because there's a lot of confusion out there with all the different tests that are available that haven't been standardized.
Thanks, Sarah. I guess there's Joanne, did you want to take up again with the closing comments?
Sure. I have 2 open-ended questions here that any one of the panelists can answer, or each of you can offer your thoughts. In your opinion, can one Vigour test method be developed for all crop kinds?
I think I started to hint at that already. I think the radical emergence test would apply to the majority of crops. There will be some exceptions, but if you wanted a one test suits all, I'd go for that.
And any other comments? Give me one good reason why we should or should not have the standardized Vigour testing in Canada. Want me to repeat it?
Maybe I could go for that one, Joanne. And for me, ISTA all about uniformity in testing worldwide and quality assurance. So I have to say for Canada, who was a founding member of ISTA, that having standardized approach and standardization in testing would be good. Whether you have to put it in regulation, I'm not convinced you should be putting it in regulation, but I think you can come up with a standardized approach and standardized methods that the labs can use and agree on.
Okay, thank you. For my part, I just want to thank each of the panelists for sharing your knowledge and your thoughts with us and helping us all to have a better understanding about Vigour testing and the challenges we face with it. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much, Joanne. We really want to thank all of our presenters again today. Steve, Allison, Sarah, Tracy, and Joanne, so much for your knowledge and helping us to educate our seed grower members and other audience participants. And all good decisions come from good research and sound science. So we really appreciate what you've contributed to our SeedTalk series. And again, thank you so much for participating today. We'd like to again thank our sponsors for today, Bayer Crop Science, Bayer Seed Growth, CCAN, Lewis M. Carter Manufacturing, 2020 Seed Labs, and that's from all of the three of our provinces, Alberta, BC, branch, the Saskatchewan branch, and the Manitoba branch. And we thank you all so much for continuing to support our efforts to educate our members and the other people involved in our industry. And for Saskatchewan, we would like to support our sponsors thank our sponsors and supporters again, CCAN and Bayer Seed Growth, Alliance Seed, Discovery, Garrett Industries, LMC, Carter, Westland Insurance, FP Genetics, SeedNet, Based Equipment, Cantera Seeds, and Caliber Seeds. Thank you all so much again for your continued support for this series as well. Final note, before we go, just a reminder for everyone to participate in the CFIA survey that's online now. The first 3 task teams have sent their recommendations to CFIA in the seed regulatory modernization process, and we welcome you to provide comments. It closes on May the 1st. CSGA has laid out some positions on their responses to those survey questions and the kind of whys and wherefores, and that you'll find that at www.seedgrowers.ca. Or you can reach out to CSGA directly or any of us provincial branches if you have any questions or comments, need to figure some stuff out. It's really important that you participate in this because this is setting up the road path for the next generation in the Canadian seed industry. Thank you so much for everybody for hanging in there through the 2+ hours for this seminar. We 3 branches, the Alberta, British Columbia, the Manitoba and Saskatchewan seed growers certainly appreciate your participation. And again, thank you so much to our presenters and our sponsors. And we hope that you have a very good spring and you get your plants, your crops seeded. And for everybody else that's involved, thank you again for participating.